Okay, welcome back. It's Thursday. I'm Jay Fidell. This is ThinkTech Talks. We're talking about community matters today. We have a lot to discuss with David Lanoue. Did I get it right?
You did.
Okay, he is it's very important. He's had so many things in his academic life that my printer ran out of paper and ink printing out his CV. But right now, he's the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, which covers a lot of geography.
It does. It covers, as the name says, humanities, which would be English, history, philosophy, religious studies, social sciences, political science, anthropology, communication. We also have the arts, and at the moment we also have the School of Education.
How do you live with yourself?
Well, it's really energizing having all those different departments, and you learn a lot. I mean, I'm a political scientist, and I didn't know anything about art. I didn't know anything about music. I knew very little about communication, really. And to learn from all of my colleagues, it's one of the most rewarding things about having an entire college is how much you learn.
Yeah, isn't that true? I mean, when I got out of law school, I swore I was never going to go to school again. And then I found out that life was school. Everything you do is school. And I really have the joy of being here, talking to people like you. I learn every day. It's like one continuous class for me. So what's HPU like these days? We love HPU. We have so many interfaces with HPU. We love to have them here at this table.
HPU's in a really exciting place right now. We have the Aloha Tower project going, which is going to just be transformative. It's going to be transformative for the university, for the downtown. It's going to be a place of community for our students. I think that's what really excites me about it, is that, I mean, Fort Street is wonderful and our students get a lot of interesting experiences there, but we're spread around a number of different buildings. We have Aloha Tower. When that comes into play, that's going to be our center. That's where students are going to congregate. They're going to get together, and it's really going to change the student experience in a very, very positive way.
So interesting. So you'll have essentially three things going at that point. You'll have the campus in Kailua, which is beautiful beyond description.
I know.
It's like wonderful campus. And then you'll have the downtown experience on Fort Street, which, I think you are Fort Street. HPU equals Fort Street, and you give it its character.
Absolutely.
And then you'll have Aloha Tower too.
So four.
Oh.
The Oceanographic Institute, OI.
OI.
Manolo, yeah.
Sure.
So that's the fourth of our, we think of Aloha Tower as being part of our downtown campus, so we think of ourselves as having three campuses.
Yeah.
Hawaii Loa in Kaneohe,
yeah.
The Fort Street campus, and now with Aloha Tower, and OI, which is just a tremendous addition to our family.
Oh, this is really there's a fabulous set of possibilities there, and also, it has a balance. It has it has a rhythm about it to have those places. You can do anything from one place to another. You came out here, a couple of years ago from Columbus, Ohio?
About a year and a half ago from Columbus, Georgia.
Columbus, Georgia?
I was
at the University of Columbus, what do I know?
Well, and that's a common fact. I had a very good friend who I caught at the last minute making plane reservations to visit me in Ohio.
No. That would have been a disappointment. And you've had a long academic career.
I have, yeah. I got out of graduate school in 1986 from Stony Brook University in New York in political science,
yeah.
And have moved around, I think, every time zone at one point or another. And it's been a great experience. I've spent 12 years in the Deep South. I'm from California and spent 8 years in a university there. And now Hawaii is just a wonderful addition to that.
So at some point, you went from teaching. I'm sure you're not finished with teaching either.
No, I taught
teaching right now.
Yeah.
But you went from teaching as a primary thing to administration as a primary thing.
Yeah, I took a sharp turn, as we call it in the university, to the dark side. Fairly early in my career, actually. We had, when I was at UC Riverside in California, I came in very junior. There were many retirements, and suddenly the whole department was very young, and they needed somebody to run the PhD program. And so 2 years out of graduate school, I was running the PhD program at UC Riverside. And from there, I became department chair and was chair at Texas Tech and the University of Alabama, and then moved to the dean position in Georgia, and now here.
You found you liked it.
I did. I liked the problem-solving aspect of it. I liked the idea of sort of providing a vision and working with people to make that vision work. I really like finding ways to help students succeed.
Yeah.
And you find that as you go through the administrative ranks, you have more ability to do that, and that's really rewarding.
And thus more gratification.
Yeah.
We're doing a program next week at the downtown YWCA, Laniakea, about Hawaii, the state of science, because we think that there is, to some extent, a state of science here now, and we think that with a few good turns and twists, adjustments, we can make even a more robust state of science. So we have half a dozen speakers about their science projects and how their science projects connect with others. But it strikes me that in the time that you've been involved in academic life, both as a teacher and as an administrator, you have seen many changes, many connections, if you will, by virtue of the internet, which enables more research, better research, and the way things work on college campuses in this country. I know that's a subject we could spend all day on, but I wonder if you have some thoughts you'd like to express.
Yeah, no, and the changes are still continuing. When I got into this business in the late 80s, nobody predicted the internet, the idea of having online courses and now blended courses, the kind of technology you have in the classroom. It really has changed a lot of the way we do things. Now, I mean, the core of it is still the relationship between the instructor and the student, and that's never going to change. Whether it's online, whether it's in the classroom, whether you're using PowerPoint or lecturing or whatever you're doing, that's the fundamental, and that's what makes us a university. But the way we're able to deliver education and the scope at which we're able to deliver it, the people around the world we can reach now, that's something that would have absolutely boggled my mind back in 1986.
Yeah, education is global, and you can't be educated without having a global awareness. There was a very interesting article, I think it was in the Sunday Times a few weeks ago, about recruiting students, and how some of even the old line schools that go back pre-revolution are saying things about their schools which are slightly hype because they want more students. It's very competitive apparently now, and they will say things to bring those students in, and then students find out that not everything that is said is true, and you get articles in the New York Times. But I wonder, how has the business changed? How has the recruiting technique changed? How has the integration of students from faraway places, how has that changed the way universities work now?
Well, one of the great things about HPU is that integration of the international and the Hawaii and the mainland has always been in our DNA. So other schools are just starting now, especially schools in the mainland, to experiment with the idea of international students and cross-cultural education and preparing students for a global job market, a global experience. We've been doing that for decades. And so in that sense, the change, we haven't really felt the change as much. And we feel too that, that we have to avoid the hype and the salesmanship and really concentrate on what we do well, what we're excellent at, show students what kind of unique experience they can get at HPU they're not going to get anywhere else in the country or the world.
Yeah. Well, you have great diversity. You've always had great diversity.
We are the most diverse university in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, really? Wow, that's incredible. And, that in itself, no courses, no teachers, no books, no pencils, no paper, that in itself is an education.
That's an amazing education. I taught a class in civil liberties during the spring semester. I had a small number of students, but two of them were European. One of them, I think, spent some of his formative years in Africa. A couple of local students, mainland military students, ex-military. And you teach civil liberties in Alabama or California, and you get a very American perspective. Everybody understands what civil liberties basically means. I mean, there are arguments around the edges, but then you bring a Swedish student in. You bring a student who lived in South Africa in, and suddenly that conversation is so much different. Does the right to free speech include the right to make comments about racial or ethnic groups? In some countries it doesn't. In some free countries it doesn't. Does the right to free speech or to civil liberties include the right to health care, the right to education? In Sweden, they would answer, of course it does. In this country, we're still arguing about it. And so I think of not just the international students learning from the American students, but the American students and the students from the islands learning from just perspectives that are, that really break them out of everything probably they've learned and thought about and taken for granted. And that's what education's about anyway. And as you say, even before they go to the first class, just interacting with these students from everywhere creates that environment for them.
What about, first the story. A friend of mine who is one of our directors of ThinkTech is a retired judge from he was the chief judge of the Second Circuit in Maui, has become infatuated, totally committed to bringing American law, American, moral practice to Mongolia. And he goes there on his own nickel. He teaches them, he meets with the Supreme Court, he tries to have a real effect on things. And when he talks about human rights and jury trials and all the things that we have learned in the school of hard legal knocks, if you will, their eyes get big and they want to know more. They want to find the magic, of American law and the process of American law. And I'm thinking, and he brings them here, and I'm thinking they really need to see schools. They need to see HPU,
Yep.
They need to see UH. They need to engage with people who are teaching these things so their eyes can get wide.
Mm-hmm.
We want that. And I just wonder if that's on the plate for HPU. Maybe it's on the plate for everybody, but tell me about HPU.
You mean in terms of bringing people in?
In terms of bringing people in, and in terms of setting school extensions out to, say, Asia, for example, our closest.
We bring in groups of students from all over the world. Some obviously as full-time students, some come in for a brief period. I just welcomed a group of students who are going to be here for several weeks from, I believe it's Denmark and Sweden.
Just to take a look.
Just take a look.
Yeah.
Last summer, we had a group of school teachers from Korea come in. And they, I say take a look, they come here for several weeks. They meet with our students. Right, some take some of our classes, they interact with our professors, and they learn a lot in those few weeks. We'd love to have them full time, of course.
But academic diplomacy is what it is.
And it goes both ways. I mean, our faculty learns so much from the visiting students and the visiting teachers and all the other visitors who come to HPU. It's just remarkable how much it changes them and it changes us.
Now, turning that a little bit was what I was really sort of aiming at, is what about opening, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, but what about opening academic extensions, schools, in other places? In other words, HPU does brick and mortar in Beijing. HPU does brick and mortar like the Shiloh School does in Ho Chi Minh City,
right.
And various others. I mean, I have the feeling, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is a mixed bag. That there are burdens that maybe some that are heavy. And it's a risk-benefit analysis, cost-benefit analysis each time, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the schools have started these extensions up and then closed them down. How does HPU deal with that? How does HPU do that?
Well, I mean, certainly that's a decision to be above my pay grade, as they say. But you're right. I mean, I think we're all watching right now to see how the success of those programs work, or whether we've crossed such a technological divide that it just maybe doesn't make sense to have a brick and mortar presence in other countries when you can have an online presence and then maybe move people over there to interact on temporarily, or move the students over here on a temporary basis. I think there's a lot we can learn from what everybody else is doing right now. But my own personal opinion, which is not that of my bosses or my colleagues, is that it's something that's probably best wait and see whether the next level of technology makes the whole question moot.
And that takes me to my next question. Moot. What about MOOC? It's a stringy way to get there, but one of the things that came up a few years ago about UH was that it really was not using MOOCs, not integrating MOOCs into its curriculum. And you really wonder, whether that was intentional or it just happened that way. But I wonder what your thoughts are about taking national MOOCs or even global MOOCs and bringing them into a curriculum like HPU, not to replace everything else,
Right.
but to add a little sauce to things.
I've talked to my colleagues about MOOCs, both in the sense you're talking about, in the sense of whether we might want to go that route. Again, it's one of those things that I think we're still learning about. Some people have found success, a lot of people haven't. One of the things I think that we really value at HPU, even online, is that connection between instructor and student. And, when you have a MOOC of 1,000, 1,500, I've heard some that even go higher than that, I'm not sure where that connection is. Do you have a connection with a teaching assistant, or is it just, I'm old enough, we used to have a sunrise semester where you'd have a teacher on television, and it was done through, I forget what school's extension it was done through, and people would watch it, and they'd take the tests, and there was no connection there. And it had its market, it had its niche, but it didn't transform education. I think MOOCs are going to affect education, already have, and they give us some very important data. Whether they're going to transform education, I'm maybe a little more skeptical there.
You see these wisdoms at the bottom of emails, and one I see regularly is a teacher, I can't phrase it exactly, but a teacher that has changed. One teacher will have changed my life. One teacher I meet in the flesh who takes an interest in me will have changed my life. And I see things like that. And I feel, especially in view of what you've just said, that education is about people. Education is a social experience as much as anything else. And because you're in a peer group, you're growing up, you're not quite there in terms of adulthood, and you really need to have people around you that relate to you. And MOOCs do not provide that.
They don't, and they don't even provide that in the online context. I mean, one of the things that we really reach for at HPU in terms of our online classes, even if students never come to Hawaii, is to make sure there's a connection with the instructor in the chat room, in feedback sessions. Some use Skype, so that you may not have the physical personal experience, but you're going to have an interactive experience. You're going to know your professor, you're going to know what he or she thinks, and you're going to be affected by that person. It's not somebody who sends out 25 lectures, has you listen to them, and pay somebody minimum wage to do the grading for you.
Yeah.
Which is probably not a fair description.
No, but that's the idea, yeah.
But even the online experience, which is going to become, I think, an increasingly large part of American higher education, it's just imperative that we link that experience with the interaction that makes education what it is.
I so agree. That's David Lanoue. He's the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Hawaii Pacific University. We are honored to have him here with us today on Community Matters. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about some professional academic issues in this community that he can speak about. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I told you we were coming back. That's David Lanoue. He's the Dean of Social Sciences, Humanities and Social Sciences at HPU. And we talked about HPU, but let's talk more about his favorite love, which is political science. He taught that for years and was an
Still do.
administrator in that area for years. So I guess I'd like to ask you some of the questions that I've been dealing with anyway about the way this community works, and just get your feedback on that. And I've identified a few questions here, and hopefully they're at a level where we can really engage on them. So first thing is the media. You know, one of the reasons for ThinkTech to exist is to have in-depth discussions and explore things on an uninhibited basis, which I think we do at least a lot of the time. But I would ask you, you know, is our population being appropriately educated? Most people, when they get out of school, their education is the media. That's what they get.
Yeah.
They don't read that much. They watch television. And television doesn't give you a lot. So the question I put is, are media offerings sufficiently educating the electorate as a political force?
You know, to me, one of the great fallacies of the internet era is that information is education. We have more information available to us today. I mean, the average college student, the average 10-year-old has more information available to them today than Harvard professors had in 1965. And yet it doesn't seem to have expanded us in any meaningful way. And I think part of it is that information used to have gatekeepers. And I don't want to get too far on that because I don't want to take an elitist view that there are people who are incapable of figuring out. I mean, this goes for for educated people and people with less education. But we all used to have people who, for better or worse, could kind of point us to, okay, this is important, this is true, this is relevant, this is irrelevant. Now, sometimes they did a better job than others. But it wasn't just this, drinking out of a fire hose of information that everybody has now. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that we have so many sources now of political information that we can choose. When I was a kid, you had the 3 networks. And they all did more or less the same thing. And so we all participated in the same national conversation. We read our local paper. We watched the television news. Today now you have on cable any number of news channels that are niche marketed towards certain ideological viewpoints. You have a billion websites that are marketed toward even narrower ideological viewpoints. And so we're not having a national conversation anymore. We're having very closeted conversations among people that we agree with. And so we're really just kind of mirroring ourselves and bouncing back and forth and hearing what we want to hear and telling other people what they want to hear. And the dysfunctionality of that, I think, shows in the way that people react when elections happen. Because elections take you out of that zone where you can't just hear what you want to hear anymore. Presidential debates, you have to hear the other person if you watch the debate. And so what happened in 2012, the Republicans, very, very smart people, were absolutely convinced the polls must be wrong. Because how on earth could they think Mitt Romney was going to lose? And then you go 2 years later, this last election, you heard the same thing from the Democrats. Oh, it can't be that bad. Oh, come on, it can't be that bad. And the reason why they say that is because everybody they talk to is saying the same thing. And they go to websites that tell them what they want to hear. Now, that's not entirely original. I remember Pauline Kael, apparently she didn't actually say it, but she was quoted as saying after the 72 presidential election when McGovern lost 49 out of 50 states, she said, I don't know how that happened. Nobody I knew voted for Nixon. Well, that's become common now. Everybody is within their little silos.
Yeah. How interesting. It sounds serious too.
Well, it is serious.
Because technology can give us the power to talk to only the people who agree with us.
Well, here's another way it's very, very serious. If you're in this silo, only talking to people that agree with you, it, I think, helps to diminish the legitimacy of the other side. Back in the 3 network days, and I don't want to go back there, but back in the 3 network days when we all had the same national conversation, we all heard the other side, and we had to talk to each other. Now, I mean, the Obama presidency, the ferocity that people on the conservative side have about Obama, that he's a socialist, he's a communist, I mean, if I were a political philosophy professor, I'd just quit my job. I mean, it's that people can come to that conclusion. But at the same time, when Bush was president, the sense that he's an illegitimate president, that his election was fraudulent. And I mean, obviously the 2000 election was interesting, but
you're on your team, he's on his team. Your team has to win, his team has to lose.
In 1998, we impeached a president over what was, in the big historical scheme of things, not a huge national offense. But he got impeached. Why? Because the core audience for those politicians said this man is not a legitimate president. You hear that now about Barack Obama. It's not all because of technology. There's a lot that plays into it, but I think being in that echo chamber with people who agree with you is politically dysfunctional.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't know the difference. They are politically or part of that political dysfunction. How does a person become properly functional? What is the proper national conversation?
Well, today, if a student asked me that question, what I'd say to them is, force yourself to listen to the other side. Go to their websites. If you're a Democrat, a liberal, watch Fox News. You don't have to agree with it, but at least hear what they have to say. Hear how they look at the world. And I'd say the same thing to a conservative student. Go to MSNBC, go to Daily Kos. Read that view of the world. I mean, one of the things that I think is so important for a functioning political system is to be able to not agree with the other side, but understand how they think, understand where they're coming from, have some empathy for their position, rather than thinking, well, they're just nuts.
Yeah.
Because if you think the other side's nuts,
right,
then the next step is you lose legitimacy.
right, and you have to. So when you say listen, you mean really?
Oh,
listen.
I mean really listen. I mean, put yourself, say, okay, and don't stop listening until you know why they believe that, and why it makes sense for them to believe that. Not because they're stupid, not because they're crazy, but because they have a different perspective and different assumptions they make about the world. I mean, we were saying in the previous segment, I mean, what's so important about intercultural education at HPU, having students from all over the world, that you have that empathy and can say, okay, I understand now why students from China feel this way and why students from Sweden feel this way. It's the same thing in politics. If you don't have any kind of empathy for the other side, then the system becomes what it is now, where you can't get a single law passed out of Congress, and they're constantly loggerheads.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I wanted to add, that was my next question. I think we could go on for all day, actually. So what happens if you have a trend in this direction, where people don't listen to the other side, where they're adversarial in their little groupings, where they only listen to people who agree with them, in tighter and tighter kuleanas? So what happens to the larger process? What can we predict will happen?
Well, I mean, I don't think we've ever had anything like this before. So I think one thing that concerns me is that the illegitimacy that people grant to the other party becomes more of a question of, is the whole system legitimate? And you hear a lot of discussion about that right now. And voter turnout trends are down. We had the lowest voter turnout in this last congressional election since, I think it was the 1930s.
This is serious.
People give up, they check out. And the problem when people check out is the people who are most likely to check out are the people who are probably more moderate and don't really have a really huge stake in it. So who do you end up with? You end up with the people with the most extreme views. Not that those views are at all illegitimate, it's just you need everybody.
Yeah. So you can't have a government of only polarized views.
Well, you can, but you end up where we are now.
Yeah. Well, where we are now doesn't sound very good. So the question then, the next question I put to you is, so what can we do about this? And I suspect that part of it is, I know that part of it is in the educational system. Part of it is in HPU, for that matter.
Absolutely. I see now as a political scientist, and it's not just political science, but I see more than ever, our old job used to be, we got up behind the podium and we provided information. I think they call it the sage on the stage. Well, that time is over. They've got information. They've got more information than they know what to do with. Our job now is, and I think the cliche is the guide on the side. Our job now is to give them, not to tell them what's right and wrong, not to tell them this is the truth and this isn't the truth, this is good information, this is bad information, but give them the tools they need to figure that out for themselves. The critical thinking skills they need, the written and oral communication skills they need, the information management skills, how to evaluate both quantitative and non-quantitative data, to look at polling information and see what the flaws are, to really become intelligent consumers of all news, even if it's just their side, but to be able to look at it with a critical mind. And I think that's probably our biggest job now in the social sciences, where I am, is to provide those tools to students so they can make those kinds of choices themselves.
And you've got to undo the damage of people who are polarized. You got to get them to come back from being polarized.
Well, you've got to get them to speak to each other. And you can do that in the classroom. It's become, and this is, like, I guess, 27, 28 years I've been in this, it's become a little more difficult than it used to be for all those reasons. That students are unwilling to hear each other and to hear the other side. But that breaks down after a while because, fundamentally they're students, they're in it together, they share, they share interests in sports, they share interests in other things. And if you just get them talking to each other, it makes a big difference.
So you're talking about a generation of people who are now pre-millennials, I mean, younger than millennials.
Yeah.
But we have this huge gap of people who are post-millennials, who are in that group that watches auto accidents, crime, weather, and sports every night, and that's the sum total of their education going forward. And they get polarized. How do you fill the gap? It's like we have to do this right away if we get right thinking, critical thinking people in there to deal with the torrent of information we all get. How do we catch up? Adult education, maybe something.
That might be part of the picture. Although I think once you get people past a certain point politically, it's much harder to have them see the other way. When they get to my age, it's not over, but it's a lot tougher because you're sort of a little more set in your ways. I don't know, and it's a real dilemma. It's a problem, I think, that on my hopeful days, which are most days, I think will end up solving itself. That the dysfunction will become so clear and the dysfunction will become so debilitating that that people will cry out for a solution. And kind of President Obama's election was sort of about that. It hasn't gone as well as he may have planned since then, but the whole idea was, I'm going to bring people together. There's not a red America and a blue America. There's the United States of America. People are just absolutely thirsting for that, except for the people on the very far sides. The rest of the country is thirsting for that. But the political institutions and the way they're set up don't really give the middle as much of a chance to have a voice.
God, we have so much to talk about, miles to go before we sleep. I want to come back in a minute and ask you the duty, the obligation of the media to educate the public, if there is one, or whether it's all just a matter of selling time. We'll be right back. This is a conversation with David Lanoue, who is the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at HPU. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with David Lanoue, in Community Matters on ThinkTech Talks. And he's the Dean of Social Sciences and Humanities and Social Sciences at HPU. So one thing left hanging after we took that recent break was what is the obligation of the press? I think everyone is very supportive of the notion of the First Amendment. Say whatever comes to mind, but then it's unfettered, and it can go off the side, as we've seen with news organizations that we used to respect a lot more than we do now. And then with Citizens United, with the fact that so much money is passing hands, and there's a consolidation of power around the media, where power has the ability to affect the way people think. And so it's not as clear and clean as it used to be. What do we do?
The obligation of the media is a tough one, because I think, in fairness to them, we have to understand they're private businesses. They're not the BBC. They require people to pay attention. And people vote with their eyeballs, they vote with their channel changers. And I think, honestly, a lot of the blame we put on the media belongs with us. CNN used to be really a very valid, viable, relatively unbiased source of news, and did some outstanding work, the Gulf War, a lot of other places. CNN today is plane crashes and Bill Cosby and this scandal, and why did it get that way?
Yeah.
It didn't get that way because the newscasters and the news people in CNN, the people who went to journalism school, said, hey, let's ruin this whole thing. It got that way because Fox News came in and they grabbed their niche. MSNBC came in, they grabbed their niche. What was left for CNN? Not much. CNN started seeing, okay, people follow scandal. When we talk about Bill Cosby, our ratings go up. When another airliner crashes, our ratings go up. So we do disasters, we do scandals, we do Hollywood. And I can blame them in the sense I wish they wouldn't do it, but I can't blame them in the sense that, they were going like this.
Yeah.
What do you do?
And how do you position all this? I would say the decline of the big news organizations in our country, with the entry of new news organizations on the channels. One that strikes me is Al Jazeera. 3 years ago, people thought that was a terrorist organization.
Right.
Now they are learning to respect its views. They're finding that it does have thoughtful reports. CCTV, not quite as thoughtful. The China, the global China,
Yeah.
not as thoughtful perhaps, and maybe a little more trying to sell China.
Right.
But still, they're right there on the same channel changer. Where do they enter? I mean, what does this mean that we can have global news views coming from everywhere and competing with the likes of CNN?
Well, ideally, it would be a great thing. Ideally, people would be sampling all over the map, getting the channel changer out, watching it all. They don't. You have a certain group of people who do, but they're very, very, very small part of the population. Everybody else finds finds the station that makes them comfortable, and they park there.
Yeah.
Al Jazeera's audience, very low. CCTV, was it RTV, the Russian one that?
Yeah.
And for that matter, CNN.
Right, it's true. Well, let's talk about the millennials. The millennials, are emerging, at least in my mind, as more a potential than a reality. Everybody has plans for them. Do they have plans for themselves? Are they going to get involved in political science? Are they going to get involved in the kinds of things you're talking about, critical thinking and taking positions and listening to other positions and being the new leaders of the country? There's going to be a vacuum out there unless somebody does. Are the millennials capable of filling that vacuum? How do you see them and define them today?
I tend to be optimistic about them. I guess you can't be a professor if you're not, but I mean,
Sure.
This particular group especially, they seem to recognize that something's wrong. And they seem to be tired of people choosing up sides. And they seem to think there has to be an answer out there. They haven't found it, and I think they've gotten a little discouraged. They all came of age around the time that Barack Obama became president. And there was this just enormous outpouring of happiness and relief. Maybe we move forward on the racial question. Maybe we'll get somebody who actually can bring the country together. We'll have this figure who, through the force of his personality, his historical importance, his charisma, and then politics came in. And
a
that was the
turnoff.
first lesson the millennials got
Yeah.
in political science.
Yeah, really.
Was that you can want to transform the world all you want, but Mr. Madison 230 years ago put together a document that makes it really, really difficult. And it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back from that. We know they didn't bounce back from that in the last election.
Yeah.
They turned out in very, very low numbers.
Yeah.
Now that'll improve over time because we know that young people vote in lower numbers than people, older people, and their numbers, turnout numbers, will rise as time goes by.
Yeah.
But this is the formative experience of your life. Just like in my mother's generation, the Depression was the formative political experience. For me, it was the Vietnam War in the '60s. This is their formative experience, and we don't know really where it's going to take them. So far, they feel discouraged. Now, I think they feel some efficacy. Certainly, they've had a big role in, for example, same-sex marriage. That they have come in really heavily behind that in kind of a transformative way.
Statement of great tolerance and all that, which tells you a lot about them, actually.
Yeah.
So, two choices. One is they ultimately figure it out, get involved, they see the power structure the way it is, they run for office. I hope to see them running for office. I was telling you that the neighborhood board has had a lot of applications recently if people want to run for office, even though it's not a very politically powerful organization. Or they can reject everything and say, I'm not involved, I don't want to be involved in it. You guys, pox on your house, we're going to do our own thing, which is very dangerous for the country.
Well, in some sense, they'll be like every other generation. Some will
divide up,
quit, some will continue, some will run for office, some will protest. I think the real critical question is whether they end up even rejecting the idea, they end up choosing sides like their parents did and their grandparents did. I mean, in some sense, that's inevitable in the American system because the system is structured to create a two-party environment, and a two-party environment is constructed, is created in a way that makes people take sides. But we have, I think the millennial generation is a lot more politically moderate and a lot more tolerant on both sides, both the left and the right so far. Now that may just be inexperience. They may just be kind of learning the slogans, and then they'll take their side and plant their flag. But as I say, I have a lot of optimism. The one place where my optimism kind of recedes a little bit is the political structure, and it's been true our entire history. It's created to thwart change. But the problem is it's also created, the basis of it is that we have to work together and compromise to get anything done. I think that we have some pretty major issues ahead of us. Climate change, for example, may be, as we start seeing its effects more and more, and the crisis grows if it does, as it almost certainly will, that the millennials will take their public spiritedness, what they've gained out of Occupy Wall Street or the Young Republicans or wherever they came from, and they'll bring that to bear and realize, okay, this is a national crisis. We can't deal with this in the same old ways, in the same partisan fashion. Not that anybody hopes that we get to the point where it becomes that kind of existential crisis, but it's the sort of thing that might bring them more together.
Yeah, hope that happens. And they do seem together on that issue anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
The old notion of having two parties, a right and the left, so that, whatever question came up, you could find that in the party that you adopted. So it's like you had a ready-made platform, and all you had to do is pick A or B, and you'd be there. It's not so easy anymore, because sometimes the platforms are not exactly right on a given issue, and you have to go to the other side to find the issue, the position you really want. So here we are in Hawaii with we have somehow invented a whole new system. You can have two houses in the legislature, but only one party.
Yeah.
And you can say, we got Republicans. Forget about it. We don't really have Republicans. So what are we going to do about this? Is this working properly? Where is it going? What can we do to make it work best?
Well, one-party systems are always going to have, we talked about voter turnout. Voter turnout is always going to be low in one-party systems because people don't feel the sense of choice. And that's not to say all Hawaii Democrats are the same. They're not. There are factions within the Democratic Party, and that does constitute some choice and does bring turnout up a little bit higher. I think the problem here has been that the National Party has moved so much in a conservative direction that they've really lost the median, the average Hawaiian voter. And I don't know how they're going to get that back, because there's no sign they're going to change that direction. Now the question is, well, is there an opening for a third party here? There is an opening for a third party, but the problem with third parties is that their success rate is really, really, really low.
Yeah.
And this, again, the system's kind of rigged that way. My favorite example is in 1992, Ross Perot ran for president. He got the votes of 1 out of every 5 Americans. That's enormous. Millions of Americans voted for him. He got as many electoral votes as you and I did. 0. And people learn from that.
Yeah.
What they learn is, don't bother. It's not worth it.
Really.
You're just tilting at windmills.
You know, I remember, we have to close, but I remember a conversation with my brother, and I said, you know, Ross Perot is great because, you know, he's not going to be beholden to anybody. He's got enough money to carry this whole thing all by himself out of his own back pocket. He has no obligation to anyone. My brother said, yeah, that's the problem. David Lanoue, thank you so much for coming down. David Lanoue is the Dean of Humanities, Social Sciences at HPU. We are so happy to have him here. Thank you, David.
Thank you.